There are different philosophies for different college football programs when it comes to the transfer portal. We've seen the likes of Colorado where they completely overhaul a roster. We've seen BYU where they're pretty picky about who they add. Well, Texas Tech is doing an interesting kind of middle ground with regards to that philosophy. We'll talk with Chris Level in a crossover edition of Locked On Texas Tech and Locked On Cougars about which strategy is ultimately correct.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars. That across from me digitally is Chris Level of Locked On Texas Tech. He's coming to us from Provo, Utah. Chris obviously is part of the broadcast crew for Texas Tech Red Raider Athletics. So we'll dig into the basketball matchup tonight here in just a minute. But I want to remind you guys, make sure you make Locked On Cougars and Locked On Texas Tech your first listen of the day. And more importantly, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on the podcast, or both podcasts, I should say. And also a reminder that today's show is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, use the promo code Locked On College, and save yourself $20 off your first purchase. All right, Mr. Level, you are here in Provo, Utah. Now, I want to start on the football front. BYU and Texas Tech didn't play a football game this past year, but they are back on the docket next year. BYU expected to make the trip to Lubbock. I've seen a lot of headlines involving Texas Tech and the transfer portal. So give, me a sense of how things have gone for Texas Tech with regards to adding talent via the portal this offseason.
Yeah, it makes our December a bit more active for those of us that are trying to cover this stuff. It's used to you just build up to that first Wednesday in February, and then you put pen to paper, and everybody signs the letters of intent and all those things. But yeah, I think they've dabbled in the portal. They being Texas Tech. Joey McGuire has always said, "I'm going to build this thing through high school recruiting, and I want to develop." And that's just kind of what his strength has been and what they want to do. But I think they've wanted to, supplement their roster in the portal. However, this year, I think because there was maybe so much production in the portal, and I think because they were just this close, pretty much just like BYU, of making it to the Big 12 title game. And I think that they are, and the rules are about to change. And I think that there's a window here where you could kind of take advantage of the old rules, which are still fairly new. And I think they're trying to tap into that. And where they needed help was in the trenches. That's why they didn't play in the Big 12 title game. If we want to be honest with ourselves, they weren't good enough on the offensive line or defensive line, period. And I think they've added 18 players that they've signed contracts to in the portal. I believe 7 or 8 of those are linemen on one side of the ball or the other, and they may not be necessarily done there. They didn't do quarterback, and they didn't touch their linebacking group. Every other position group at some level or another has been added to.
Well, and I'll interject on the BYU side of things. It sounds like the philosophy of what Tech and BYU, speaking of just philosophically across the board, they want to be developmental programs. They want to bring in high school guys, let them kind of grow up over 2 or 3 years, and then ultimately become the players that the coaches envision they can become. And Kalani Sitake, on his side of things, he has been very adamant in saying, hey, we made a mistake year one in the Big 12, because BYU that first year went really heavy in the portal, Chris. They brought in 60 new players. I'm talking that includes high school. Obviously, with BYU, a lot of guys are returned missionaries for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Most of your listeners will know as the Mormon Church. Guys coming in via JUCO, and then the transfer portal. They turned over half that roster, and it resulted in a 5-7 record. BYU, I think, switched philosophies after that and said, okay, we're going to bet on continuity. We're going to take the young guys in our position groups, train them, develop them, and as you mentioned, we'll supplement with the transfer portal. In the last 2 cycles for BYU transfer portal wise, well, it yielded an 11-2 record this past year for BYU, including that bowl win over Colorado that had a lot of people talking. And right now, I think BYU's up to 8 additions in the portal. So not a lot of additions, but every single one of the guys BYU has added, I can essentially point to Chris and say that guy is picked to go to that position because BYU needs to fill that spot. Speaking of like an offensive tackle, for example, Andrew Gentry was a starting caliber guy at Michigan, has connections to BYU by virtue of being a member of the LDS Church. Well, guess what? BYU needed an offensive tackle. It's a match made in heaven in that respect. They flipped Keanu Tanuvasa from Utah to bolster their defensive line depth, as you mentioned. Trench play is at a premium in the Big 12, especially for a program like BYU. And as you mentioned, Texas Tech, they need that. So I think these two programs, they're approaching it the right way, and the philosophies don't sound very off from one another.
Yeah, I think Joey McGuire had said coming into the window, we want 8 to 12 guys. And then I think you start getting who you want, and then you start saying, this guy is here on a visit. Can we really turn him away? And then it just becomes like and their budget or whatever is still there. And so you just keep adding. And I think that here's the thing, and both coaches are going to say this. Both coaches are going to say, we have got to be careful who we bring into our locker room because it's all about chemistry and culture. Every program has a culture. It may not be good, but every program has a culture. And that's what you're trying to balance here. Who can we bring in? And I will say, I don't know how many of the 8 that BYU added, but about half of the guys that Texas Tech has brought in are more than 1 year guy. It's not like they just went 18 1-year guys. And, I don't know if I'm super comfortable with that, but a lot of these guys have 2 or 3 years left. And I think that's the balance, but that's what these coaches are essentially getting paid to do right now, is to mesh your culture and continuity with all these new pieces, and you're racing against the clock in many ways.
Yeah, I think BYU fans are like, wow, this sounds exactly like BYU, because every guy that BYU's added, to my knowledge, has at least 2 years of eligibility remaining. Because the same thing, going back to their original philosophy in the portal, Chris, is they brought in a bunch of 1-year guys, and it didn't mesh, it didn't gel the way that they expected it to, and it resulted in a 5-7 record, a 5-game losing streak at the end of the year. So BYU learned a lot of hard lessons their first year in the Big 12, and they benefited to a large degree by going 11-2 this past year. But you're right. The philosophy, the culture, BYU is a bit of a unique place, obviously being a church-sponsored institution. I think the only other program that I would say would have a similar feel to it is Baylor because of their affiliation religiously. But I think Texas Tech, it's a unique place. Lubbock, Texas is kind of out on its own. It's a unique environment, and you work there, you work around this university, it's a unique element. So you have to find the right mix of people who can fit in with that. And I think it's these two programs, speaking of the Red Raiders and the Cougars, they sound very similar to one another in how they approach things.
Yeah, and I, as somebody though, that once you start dabbling in the portal, I get a lot more excited about spring ball because it's not just your early enrollees that are freshmen, which, let's be honest, freshmen rarely factor in immediately, and it's always about the promise. And maybe theoretically, it's most of the time it's like 2 or 3 years down the road before most of these guys really do something meaningful. But it makes spring football that much more important, I guess, because every one of these guys is about to show up on these campuses, and they're going to be handed starting spots, or the thought that they're going to start or be a heavy rotational guy. Now they'll have to earn it and all those things, but it certainly makes watching the competition in spring. And now I know Joey McGuire has said, and I don't know how Coach Sataki is approached this, but they're likely to be over their roster limit going through the spring.
Yeah.
And then they're going to have some tough conversations after the spring or midway through and go, hey, I don't know if we have a spot for you, as these rosters have to be cut down to 105 by July 1st or whatever it is. But that will make the spring football practices that much more meaningful, and whatever spring game you have, maybe more so than really ever before when you think about it in these terms.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I can tell you BYU kind of got a head start on that in many respects. Their exit interviews, the coaches, from what I understand, sat down and just kind of essentially told the players, here's where you stand in regards to the roster. If you want to stick around and battle through spring ball, you're more than welcome to. But understand that there will be a pare down coming with the rosters. We have to cut it to 105 guys. That's the old roster limit, if I'm not mistaken, is 123 players. That's at least 18 roster spots that are gone. Just gone, and their guys are going to have to find new opportunities elsewhere. And BYU had a few walk-ons, and in fact, one of the starting safeties who was a walk-on exited the program after some of those conversations took place. So it's going to be an interesting time. And you mentioned already the new rules coming into effect. If I'm not mistaken, is Tech kind of rolling all their collective efforts in-house now? Is that the whole plan with the Matador Collective and the like?
Yeah, I believe that's what everybody's going to do. Is these collectives will essentially go away, and they'll be operating under the university umbrella.
Yeah.
So right now in Lubbock, there's the Red Raider Club, which has been around for forever, and that's what provides the scholarships, and that's what donors donate to get a parking place and season tickets and all that stuff. And then there was the Matador Club, because the collective couldn't be run by anything to do with the university. Well, essentially those will merge, and I guess all be under the Red Raider Club umbrella, which will be operated by the university. Again, that's if the rules are like we think that they'll be, because it's like, yeah, NIL is going away, or we're going to do traditional NIL, and you'll be able to sign autographs for $500, and we're going to run all those deals through the clearinghouse.
Yeah.
I'm just not convinced about all this stuff just yet and everything, but that's what everybody is operating under, I guess, right now. But we'll see.
Well, the House settlement, I know they keep saying that it's hard, it's like done. It's not done. It keeps morphing. Like we keep getting different changes to that. So I'm expecting BYU's collectives, they'll have some sort of agreement with what BYU's doing athletics wise to roll it in. I'm very curious where it all goes, because you mentioned the rules keep changing. And if they hold where they're at right now, yes, they're probably going to be all run in-house, but give them a week and it may change for the worse in many respects. Who knows?
That's right. That's right.
All right. We do need to get to the basketball game. Big matchup in Provo tonight in the Marriott Center. Texas Tech in town. Now, BYU, I think they got a little payback on their mind for what happened in Lubbock a year ago. We'll delve into that momentarily as you roll on this crossover edition of Locked On Texas Tech and Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, Game Time is here for you guys wherever you want to get out to games. Obviously, attending the new 12-team college football playoff is an incredible experience. But even if you're interested in other things, whether it's music, comedy, theater events, they've got all the options for you guys. The best part is all of them bring fans together like never before. All of us have watched the playoff games and been thrilled to a certain level. And if you want to make new memories with the updated format and extra teams involved, you can do it with our friends over at Game Time. It's a brand new feature called the Game Time Picks feature. Makes getting your tickets for events even easier. Filters out all the fluff to give you incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets to find the right options for you. All of us seem to want to get out to events. We don't want to waste time having to find the tickets. Best part is Game Time Picks and help you find those tickets for an upcoming game or whatever event you're interested in. All of us, you can go online and see the seat views before buying. And the best feature, I think, of the entire app is the all-in pricing feature. You toggle it in the app, shows exactly what you're paying right up front, all the fees included. So take the guesswork out of buying your ticket and do it with our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you once again for being Locked On Cougars and Locked On Texas Tech, your first listen of the day. Jay Catch here. That's Chris Level there. Now, Chris, a year ago in Lubbock, BYU and Texas Tech played an interesting matchup. And with I felt like 10 minutes to go in that game, I actually was watching it. I was here in Utah, obviously watching it from afar. I'm like, all right, BYU's got this in they got in the bag, essentially. It felt like they had it under control. And then all of a sudden, Texas Tech just turned on the afterburners and just blew right past the Cougars in that matchup. And it was one of those losses you kind of looked back at the end of the year and said, what could have been had they held on? Now, BYU ended up in a pretty good spot, all things considered, finishing fifth in the conference. But this is going to be an interesting game because Texas Tech just went and blew the doors off of BYU's hated rival Utah on Saturday night. Kind of looks similar to what happened in Lubbock a year ago to BYU. Where is Grant McCasland's team right now as they come into Provo, Utah tonight?
Yeah, it is interesting going to, because this was my first trip to see Utah basketball. That they have a ways to go. This conference is gonna do mean things to them if they don't step it up quickly. I thought Tech would would play well. They did not play well in their opener against UCF, and they really bounced back. But I wasn't expecting to win by 28 points there in Salt Lake. And I think Utah's team is somewhat similar to BYU. BYU's is a lot more talented, and there's a lot more upside, I think, with BYU's. And I say that as far as similarities in that the way that they've got skill, they're long, they rely on the three, and like Texas Tech does. But I mean, they're BYU was a problem last year. It's been fascinating to see kind of Coach Young put his NBA twist on everything compared to what Coach Pope was doing a year ago when it was just this outside the box offense. You're like,
Was.
what is this sorcery that we're having to guard? And Texas Tech for about 32 minutes didn't guard it very well last year, and then they obviously played again in Kansas City as well. But yeah, it's I think Grant's team is still figuring out how good they can be. They are, I don't know if either one of these two teams is going to win this league. Okay, so let's just be honest. However, I think both of these two teams are going to fight to be in the top half and certainly for NCAA tournament bids.
Mhm.
It's about because you've been already part of two blowouts.
Yeah.
And like, okay, and what I'll say is like, which Texas Tech team is going to show up tonight? I don't know. I know what it's going to take,
Mhm.
but that's just the way this league is gonna roll. And I am curious how BYU will guard Texas Tech. JT Toppin, low post player, very, very good.
Yeah.
Federico, their backup big, who plays next to him sometimes, has been very good and kind of coming on. And there's a lot of elite shooting out for Texas Tech. But BYU poses a whole different set of problems on that end of the floor. And so maybe it's about who guards the other team a bit better tonight. But tell me about your 6'9" Russian point guard here.
Yegor Demon, that's who you're talking about now. He's a projected lottery pick in the NBA draft, this coming NBA draft cycle. Really impressive athlete because you mentioned 6'9", true point guard. I actually call him a point forward if you want. But his ability to see the court, Chris, is really, really special. He's been, it's kind of been this chief strength so far this year, just across all the games he's played, is his ability to see the court and set his teammates up in good spots. The major concern right now is his shot is way off. Now, he missed about a month's worth of time with a lower leg injury. He got injured in their first road game of the year. They went back to face Providence in that Big 12 Big East Challenge. He got injured in that game and then sat out until BYU took on Arizona State in the Big 12 opener. And he's looked rusty offensively shooting the ball in the two games since. BYU needs to get him going offensively because if he can start to hit shots from the outside in particular, that's going to open up a whole lot of things and make him even more dangerous with regards to BYU's offense. The other young man I probably should mention alongside him is another freshman, Cannon Catchings. Funny enough, Catchings has come on strong the last couple of games where he was a guy who was struggling early on this season in terms of his shot. So it's interesting. They're freshmen. They're 18 years old. Both of them can possible one and done types. It's going to be curious to see how they handle the situation because BYU got absolutely curb stomped at Houston. Nothing. I mean,
They
nothing.
won't. They won't be alone in that. They have a weight room in downtown Houston, and those guys use it. I mean, it is not you try to run a lot of offense and all this finesse and this and that. They just and the referee, he doesn't puff on that whistle too much in that arena, man. Goodness gracious, but yeah.
And that's the thing about it is I think Houston showed what the kind of the peak of the powers. When they're shooting threes and making them at the clip they were making them against BYU, that they're going to blow the doors off a lot of teams. And I'm interested to see how BYU responds here because it's a quick turnaround. The players, Trevin Nell spoke after the game and said they're eager to get back on the court. BYU doesn't practice on Sundays, so they really have only had one true prep day coming into this matchup outside of a shoot around today. And I'm interested to see how they handle this because players are upset with, I think, their overall performance against Houston. And now that they're back in the Marriott Center, it'll be curious to see how they respond on a quick turnaround in this matchup.
Yeah, and you look at that's what this league is going to be.
Yeah.
Grant will tell you it's not the team that's going to be the most talented that will win it, and I think right now we would probably all agree that Iowa State's maybe the best team in the league right now. They are a real basketball team. They've got guys that know their roles. They're deep. That's Texas Tech's next home game. It's on Saturday in Lubbock. But it's TJ Otzelberger, I think he's got a great team, but it's going to be which coach can get their guys to play really hard every night.
Yeah.
Because you look at what West Virginia did to Kansas out of the gate. Johnny Dawkins brought his, UCF Knights in, and you kind of tripped up Texas Tech, and you're like, wait, this isn't the way that the season was supposed to start.
Yeah.
And then you get overcorrected, and you go, okay, well, we've got to fix this, and you go out and beat Utah, or you go and Kansas beat that same UCF team by 50. And so it's wild, and who can string them together? Who can string the 3 to 4 to 5 wins together? And it's going to be really difficult because I just start looking at these schedules on paper and you're like, where is the breather? Where do you go get right? It just doesn't exist in this league.
No.
Yeah, it doesn't exist in this league. But BYU is an interesting one in that this is a bit, starting true freshman is a bit outside the box compared to what everybody's doing now. Everybody tries to be older,
Yeah.
and more mature and experience and all the stuff, and then you've got these two kids out there that are extremely talented and long and all these things. However, can they handle the rigors of what they'll be put into and the crowds and all this stuff? And I love basketball season because it is like 10 straight weeks of a knockdown, drag out fight. And you think you're dead in the water, and then you play 3 days later, and you're like, okay, all the world's right back again. And then you feel, it's just this constant, because nobody's rolling through this thing. Nobody's going to go, 16-4. That's just not going to exist. Maybe 15-5, wins it, but it makes it a lot of fun because any given night, man, you never know. But I'm fascinated to see the crowd at the Marriott Center tonight as well. I've heard nothing but great things. Lubbock prides itself on a big time atmosphere at the United Supermarkets Arena, and so I'm curious what the Marriott Center looks like tonight.
Marriott Center should be near capacity tonight. Students should be, by and large, back in town with the semester starting on Wednesday. So it should be a good crowd. It should be a fun environment. I know that talking with people who went to the game in Lubbock a year ago, they couldn't speak more highly of just the crowd energy down there in Lubbock. They loved Red Raider fans and just the overall environment of that game. So I'm looking forward to it as well. Now, I do have a couple of questions. You mentioned JT Toppin in particular. I'm interested. You mentioned how BYU is going to go about guarding him. We'll delve into some kind of keys to the game coming up next. I want to kind of get your thought on what Tech can do to sweep the Utah road trip that they're on as they come, and they've already beat Utah. If they can sweep it against BYU or vice versa, how does BYU bounce back after getting absolutely destroyed by Houston? We'll delve into that momentarily on this crossover edition of Locked On Texas Tech and Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is here for you guys to have fun with the NFL playoffs. The field is set. So if you want to have some fun this NFL playoff season, do it with our friends at FanDuel. They are the best and the brightest because right now, new customers bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. And of course, the FanDuel app gives you everything to place your live bets, same game parlays, and so much more. And it doesn't have to just be NFL football. If you're interested in other sports, they've got all that for you guys. I've got just pick for you guys. I was looking at some of the odds from our friends at FanDuel. You have a 14-3 Minnesota Vikings team going to the LA Rams. Now, I am a biased San Francisco 49ers fan who's absolutely upset that my team failed to make the playoffs. I would be taking Minnesota to go on the road to SoFi Stadium and win that game. Just a little bit of a tip. If you want to take advantage of that or any other options out there, visit the website and get started today at FanDuel.com and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com to get started once again. Make this playoff season unforgettable. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Texas Tech your first listen of the day. Jake Hatch, Chris Level. Now, Chris, you had an opportunity to see the Huntsman Center, and obviously Texas Tech ran away from Utah. on Saturday night. I know here's the thing about BYU and Utah fans. They like to hate watch each other. So there'll be a lot of Utah fans. Now they obviously they face Iowa State tonight. Speaking of the Utes, so they'll have their one eye over there on the Cyclones and playing out there in Ames. But then they'll also be checking out BYU to keep an eye on how things go tonight. You mentioned earlier how BYU is going to go about defending Texas Tech, in particular JT Toppin. And I've looked at Toppin. I've kind of looked at what he does as a player, and I'm very impressed with him. The other guy I am very concerned with is Darian Williams. It just feels like they're a 1-2 tandem it's kind of pick your poison in many respects. Is there anybody else I should be aware of, I guess, from the BYU side, a Cougar fan out there that should be aware of in terms of what the lineup with Texas Tech is? Because Pop Isaacs, as some Cougar fans may not know, is no longer on this roster.
Yeah, Chance McMillan is another guard, and he's averaging. I think he's like 51% 3-point shooter. So you're going to deal with some elite level shooting in this game. I mean, BYU's got a handful of guys that are absolutely gold from deep behind the arc. So let me talk about BYU for a second, because what I see with the Cougs is that this is it's a team with a lot of length and everything, positional size, I would say, and they are what they probably haven't gotten enough credit for is they're an elite rebounding team.
Yeah.
And as they rebound the ball so well, they create extra possessions for themselves. And they are so good with their offense, and you've got multiple facilitators, and you've got at least 3 shooters on the floor at any given time. And that's a problem, especially when they're rebounding. So, because when you would look at the way the team's built on paper, you wouldn't just assume, oh man, I bet these guys are just crushing it on the glass. No, I mean, but that's the reality of it, right? And when what is also interesting to me is you study this team, they're not really in any close games. The losses they've gotten really it handed to them for the most part. And then the only close game is UC Riverside early on in the season. Everything else is very lopsided one way or the other. And so I don't know how they'll handle being in a close one. Texas Tech, they lost their last close one, obviously at home against UCF. But just as an aside, it was kind of fascinating to see kind of how their game, they're just it's one way or the other.
Well, real quick on that front is BYU. Kevin Young has talked about the fact that he felt like BYU's non-conference schedule was pretty light, and obviously, when you take over as head coach in April, it's hard to go and just completely gut your entire non-conference slate that the previous coaching staff started putting together. He's talked about beefing that up in future years because I think BYU coming into Big 12 play, they ran away from Arizona State in that opener in Provo and got a big win there. But then they went to Houston, and I think that was an eye-opening experience for everybody across the board at BYU. I'm talking about the newcomers and Jaeger Demon and Cannon Catchings, but also vets, guys like Dallin Hall, Fuseni Traore, Richie Saunders, all guys who have been through this before. They all look like deer in headlights in many respects in that game. And I think that they need some time to get some seasoning here, but they can't wait too long. And I am with you. I am curious to see how BYU really matches up in a tight affair because you mentioned it's been blowout city one way or the other for the Cougars. You mentioned the rebounding. They've been very good rebounding the basketball until Houston. They got absolutely destroyed on the boards against the Houston Cougars, and Houston made it a point to go out there and really dominate and create those extra possessions for themselves. If BYU can't rebound the basketball against Texas Tech, they're going to find themselves in a world of hurt because, A, they don't have a lot of positional size in the front court. Keba Keita's their starting center, Chris, and he's 6'8". He makes up for his lack of height with his elite athleticism, but you get him in foul trouble, suddenly BYU's got to deal with Fuseni Traore, who as their 5-man, who is 6'6". So there's a size issue on the interior, and I am curious to see if BYU can get back to being the elite rebounding team they were before that Houston game, or if there will be a kind of a malaise or a carryover effect of what happened against the Cougars.
Yeah, Houston's typically their offense, just get a shot up on the rim and go get it. Let those big boys just go get it, get people out of the way. It's a problem. The Red Raiders have to deal with the Houston Cougars twice this year, so we'll see how that goes. If I'm Texas Tech, by the way, I on a different podcast before I learned how to say his name, because I had somebody on our trip go, I was like, how do you say this kid's name? If I only just Googled the million places that you could probably hear it, but I was like in a pinch for time, and they were like, it's Igor Demon, and I'm
Well,
like, okay. So in another podcast, I call him Igor Demon, and I'm like, okay, now it's Jaeger Demon.
well,
Oops.
here's the thing though. When he first showed up at BYU, you probably heard every pronunciation that you
Okay,
can
yeah.
imagine under the sun, and it actually took him finally getting on social media and saying, "Everybody, it's Yegor Demon." He literally had to spell it out for everybody. So don't feel bad.
Your roster has some names. I'm gonna struggle tonight on the old radio call. There's some serious names I've got to learn on this deal.
Yeah, so
But
Keba Keita. So I was talking with our good friend Park Ranger from Locked On Cougs, obviously covering Houston in the lead of that game. He asked me on the podcast, this is backstory, pulling back the curtain. He's like, "Okay, Jake, I'm gonna ask you right now, how do you pronounce your center's name?" And he said, "I have it as Keba Keita or something like that." I'm like, "Well, sorry to correct you, Keba Keita." And here's the thing, that's in this day and age of basketball, where guys are literally coming from across the globe. It's hard to keep track of it all, and you got to do some work, some legwork to find out how the pronunciations are to be done.
and most of the time their coaches don't call them by the right name. Because I'm far too guilty of listening to, well, that's how coach said it, so
Yeah.
I'll just go with that. Well, no, a lot of time the coaches don't even know how to say their correct name, all that. But I speaking of Jaeger Demon, I if I'm Texas Tech, I try to turn him into a scorer. I
Yeah.
think his strength is his ability to pass
Mhm.
and facilitate. I think that's when he's at his best and when he's helping his team the most is when he's able to kind of bounce around and kind of get it to those 3-point shooters and all those things. And so now how do you go about that? Now, we'll kind of see, but that would be something I would the rebounding battle is clear. And then to me, this is what was so good about Texas Tech versus Utah.
Mhm.
22 assists to 5 turnovers. They just did a phenomenal job of sharing the ball and
Yeah.
then just taking care of it. And I think part of what gives BYU troubles for other people is when you turn the ball over, BYU is so good in transition,
Mhm.
and so you can't give them that, because what's the 18,000 going to do whenever they get in transition and it equals a three or a dunk or whatever, and you're feeding into your own set of problems. So taking care of the ball, and I don't mean to be Captain Cliche, but because everybody wants to out rebound your opponent and take care of it. But I may make Demon try to beat me scoring it if I can. Maybe easier said than done. But yeah, just the live ball turnovers, man, need to be a low number for Texas Tech.
Well, and here's the thing: if I were scouting BYU, I'd tell Jaeger, show us you can beat us. Like, make him prove it. And if he proves it, you say, hey, props to you,
Yep.
sir. You did it. Now, real quick on the BYU side of things, I'm looking at the Cougars. They didn't shoot the ball well against Houston. They did very well against Arizona State. And obviously, that's a home versus road disparity. That just happens in college basketball. BYU's full, I think their whole goal tonight, trade threes for twos. If they can shoot at a high clip from the three and obviously keep Texas Tech off of the perimeter in terms of shooting and maybe force them to work it inside, and tell JT Toppin and tell the other guys on Texas Tech's front line, if you guys can outscore us trading threes for twos, good on you. That's kind of the way I would approach it if I'm BYU. But I also know that the Cougars, they've got a lot of work to be done with regards to just kind of getting this squad right, because I don't think anybody felt good coming out of that Houston game, because they literally got blown away in every facet. So it'll be interesting to see how they respond in this matchup, Chris.
Yeah, and again, don't get too down about what Houston did to you, because
Uh,
they're going to do that to everybody
yeah,
in that building. And they rolled into this league last year in year one and won it. And I think it didn't sit very well with a lot of people, but that's the reality of it. And Kelvin Sampson, man, he's a phenomenal coach, and he's got some toughness about his team. So yeah, I think we still don't know a lot about a lot of these teams because you have no body of work.
yeah,
And until you kind of get 2 or 3 weeks into this, Chris Beard, the former coach, used to say, you can't judge it. You can't really judge your team until the turn.
yeah,
Well, that's 10 games in to this deal, and that's still a long ways away.
yeah.
I think you can judge it before that, but I'm still trying to figure out these Red Raiders, and I think you're probably still trying to figure out these Cougs. But hey, man, this is game three. What is what we got? 17 left of these bad boys after tonight. Goodness gracious.
It's going to be an absolute war of attrition all season long. Just no doubt about
Yes.
that. Well, Chris, as always, it's good to catch up with you, my man. Looking forward to this matchup, obviously. And we will, obviously, I'm sure you'll have a postcast coming up as well. And obviously, plenty of coverage in the coming days as well on Locked On Texas Tech. Where can everybody find your work if you're there a Cougar fan out there that wants to catch you guys?
Yeah, Locked On Texas Tech, man. Me and Casey Cowan are there every day, and we're talking to our fine people like Mr. Hatch. Sometimes on these roundtables, on these Tuesday nights is when we tape these things. They roll on Thursdays, but yeah, so we won't be able to be a part of those tonight because we got a game to broadcast and watch.
It's true. I already sent my condolences to Drake and company and told him, hey, I'm not going to be there. But nonetheless, looking forward to this. If you want to check out all things BYU, check out Locked On Cougars wherever you get your podcasts, just like Locked On Texas Tech. If you want my thoughts on all things sports, just check out the show Twitter feed or Instagram or Facebook, Locked On Cougars right there. Chris, as always, a pleasure, my man, and look forward to this matchup.
Hey, man, keep hope alive out there. Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me, and enjoyed it, Jake.
We'll do it again soon. All right, that's Chris Level. I'm Jake Hatch. As always, thank you for making Locked On Texas Tech and Locked On Cougars your first listen today. And more importantly, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.